All right, welcome everyone to our training this evening. Thank you all for being here. We have a packed agenda, so I'm just going to jump in. Today we have Abby Herringshaw, clinical psychologist with Project AFECT, which stands for Autism Family Empowerment Coaching and Training with Stanford Medicine Children's Health. Next slide, please. All right, for anyone who's new here, we want to briefly talk about what the FRC does here in San Mateo County. We serve families who have children with disabilities between the ages 0 to 22. We are staffed by parents and caregivers of children and young adults with disabilities, and we provide support, information, referrals, and systems navigation. We also offer trainings, support groups, a resource binder, and a monthly e-newsletter. I want to give a disclaimer that the FRC is not a legal firm or a legal services agency, and we cannot provide any legal advice. Any information provided by the FRC should not be considered a means of taking the place of legal advice that must be obtained through an attorney. With that, we invite you to connect with us, and I'll put our contact information in the chat. Next slide, please. Next, we want to go over some general housekeeping items to make sure that this training runs smoothly this evening. As mentioned, we will be recording this training to make available on our FRC video library. So we ask that you please mute yourself when not speaking to avoid any background noise, and please be respectful throughout this training. We are offering simultaneous interpretation in Spanish today. So if you haven't already, please select the language that you would like to listen to this presentation in. You can do this in the settings bar under the globe icon and select either English or Spanish. Even if you're listening in English, please still select English in the settings, and this will allow you to hear the interpreter translate from Spanish to English. We are also offering live automated captions today. So if you'd like to view the captions, you can go to your Zoom settings bar, find the CC icon, and click to show captions. Later on in this training, we will offer 2 breakout rooms. And I'll explain in the next slide how to join the breakout rooms, but these will give you an opportunity to connect with Project AFECT staff in a smaller group. You'll complete worksheets on behavior plans, and you'll be able to get your questions answered. The breakout rooms will not be recorded, but we still encourage you to refrain from sharing any names or detailed information to protect your privacy and the time in the small groups. If you registered in advance for the training, you should have received an email with the parent worksheets attached. There's an English version and a Spanish version, and I'll also put them in the chat. And to access them, you just click on the attachment and open, and you'll be using these worksheets during the breakout rooms. At the end of the training, we will be distributing a survey both in English and Spanish to collect your feedback on how this training went. It will be anonymous and will help us understand how to improve our trainings for you all. And last, we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with all of the materials from this training. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, as mentioned, we will have 2 breakout rooms throughout this training. We'll have 3 rooms set up, so 2 for our English speakers and 1 for our Spanish speakers. For our English speakers, it doesn't matter which room you join, but depending on how many people join each room, we might reassign you to balance them out. So just heads up. So when the time comes, we'll open the breakout rooms, and if you're joining on a computer, you'll be able to click breakout rooms in the Zoom menu bar, and then click the blue join button to join the room of your choice. If you're joining on a mobile device, you can tap breakout rooms in the upper left corner, select the room of your choice, and then click join. And if you need help joining a room, you can let us know and we can assign you to a room. Okay, thank you everyone. And now I'll turn it over to Abby.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Abby Herringshaw. I'm a clinical psychologist in developmental behavioral pediatrics at Stanford Children's Health. And I am here with Dr. Ingrid Lynn and Nadia Lopez, who are also from our team at Project AFECT. And Project AFECT is a project funded by the California Department of Developmental Services, designed to increase access to services for families affected by autism spectrum disorder. As Iris was mentioning, we do have some parent worksheets to fill out during the presentation. We are going to have 2 breakout groups. The breakout groups will be a time that you can complete those parent worksheets. You can feel free to take notes on them throughout, but there will be a dedicated time to complete them. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So part 1 of this, that goes with parent worksheet number 1. That'll be the page 1 is the first one for the first breakout group, and the second breakout group, we will do pages 2 and 3 in those parent worksheets. In part 1, we're really going to be learning about patterns of behavior and how to conduct like a functional behavior analysis to understand why a behavior is happening. So for this section, we are going to be talking about the ABC pattern or the ABC model of learning. And this is actually going to be throughout the whole presentation. So this model might be familiar to some of you. If you have ever had ABA or a parent training component in ABA, it might be new for some of you. But either way, just to review quickly, A in this model stands for antecedent, and that's whatever happens right before a behavior. And if we're talking about challenging or disruptive behaviors, we might think this is like a trigger for the behavior. B in this model is going to be what your child actually does. And again, we would usually be talking about a disruptive behavior, a challenging or problematic behavior here. And C in this model stands for consequence. That's whatever occurs right after in response to the behavior. And in parenting terms, consequence usually gets kind of like a negative connotation, like a negative consequence. It's not necessarily what we mean here. This can be positive or negative. Either way, just kind of like outcome, whatever happens immediately after the behavior. So since we will be having you complete some ABC data on your parent worksheet, we're going to do just a little bit of practice here to make sure everyone's comfortable identifying A, B's, and C's in different situations. So in this situation, this says, John began to hit his mother after she says he cannot have any more cookies. His mother tries to distract him with his favorite toy to make him stop. So in this situation, I want everyone to think for a minute, what would be the A, the antecedent or trigger? What would be the B, the behavior? And what would be the C, the consequence? I'm gonna give you guys about 10, 15 seconds to think about that. And I always like to say, when in doubt, start with behavior. If you're not sure, what's the challenging behavior here? So we'll start with that one first. The challenging behavior here, the B, is John began to hit his mother. So if we start from there, we want to say, what was the trigger? Why did that happen? What happened right beforehand? So in this situation, it was that John's mother said he could not have any more cookies, is the A. B, John began to hit his mother. And then C, mother brings John his favorite toys to distract him and make him stop hitting. Okay, so we have a few more practice situations here. This next one says, Amy's parents are having a conversation. Amy begins throwing toys at her sister, so her parents stop talking and come address the situation. This one's a little trickier. Again, I'm going to give you guys about 10 seconds here to try to think through what's the A, the antecedent, B, the behavior, and C, the consequence. Okay. So again, it might be easier in some cases to start with the B. So Amy begins throwing toys at her sister. That's obviously the problem behavior here. What was happening right before that? Amy's parents are talking to each other. So that's a little bit less obvious of an antecedent here. So when you're not sure, just describe exactly what was happening ahead of time, even if it's not clear to you why that was happening. And in this case, if her parents were talking to each other, they're probably ignoring her. And so we're going to talk a lot more about attention over the next couple hours, but that can be a huge factor in certain situations with problematic behavior. So we have A, Amy's parents are talking to each other and probably ignoring Amy. B, Amy begins throwing toys at her sister. And the consequence, the parents stop talking and then come address Amy and her sister, come talk to them. Okay, 2 more practice situations here. So I'll make sure you guys are really comfortable with this. This next one says, Katie starts screaming after Bobby touches her favorite toy. A teacher comes over and helps Katie calm down. So again, I'll give you about 10 seconds to think about that one. Okay, so this one I have just all at once for the sake of time. So in this one, we have Bobby touches Katie's favorite toy. Is the A, or the trigger. B, behavior, Katie starts screaming. C, consequence, the teacher helps Katie calm down. The last one here for practice, Liam pinches his mother when they walk past his favorite candy at the grocery store. His mother ignores the pinching and continues walking. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds again. Okay, so for this one, the A, the trigger, Liam and his mother walk past his favorite candy at the store. B, the behavior, Liam pinches his mother. And C, the consequence, the mother ignores the pinching and continues walking in this situation. Okay, so we will be going through some ABCs for some of your situations on the parent forms during breakout groups, but we will be there during those if you have questions with that process. All right, so B's, that we don't have direct control over, because that's what our kiddos are actually doing, right? So we can try to set things up in the best possible way with our A's. We can try to respond in the best possible way with our C's. The B's, though, what the child actually does, although we might wish we could directly control them, we can't directly control those things. So we're not going to talk too much about these. So instead, we're going to skip right over to C's, to consequences, because that's a major way that we shape and change behavior. So again, consequences, even though sometimes we think of those as a negative thing, that's not what we mean here. We really just mean outcome, and it's whatever happens immediately after in response to a behavior. And again, consequences can be either positive or negative for a child. And this is going to be from your child's perspective. So whatever happens immediately after, does your child think in that moment that was a good thing or a bad thing, is what we're asking here. So if whatever happens immediately after is a good thing from your child's perspective, something they liked happened right after, that's the technical definition of reinforcement. And that means that behavior is more likely to occur again in the future. And I think most people are kind of generally familiar with the term reinforcement. And I think a lot of times when I ask parents, what does that mean to them? They kind of say, oh, like I give a reward, or I try to praise my child, or positive reinforcement, right? And that's the same idea. We try to give a positive outcome after something in the hopes that it would happen again in the future. So this is a very technical definition of that, but if you think about it, hopefully it should match up with your kind of general sense of what reinforcement usually means. On the other hand, if whatever happens is either negative, so your child doesn't like it, or neutral, meaning just nothing happens, there was no effect, that's either punishment or extinction, and we'll talk about each of those. That means that behavior is less likely to occur again in the future. And really here, ideally, we're talking about immediately afterwards. So there's kind of like a 10-second-ish rule is the ideal kind of window we want to capture. If we're able to give feedback, positive or negative consequences, within about 10 seconds after the behavior, That way we can tap into this really basic kind of learning that like all animals learn this way, like sea slugs learn this way. Our brains are really pre-wired to learn that when two things happen in rapid succession, those two things go together and to change behavior based on that moving forward. So if we're able to tap into that, we don't depend on your child like stopping, thinking, and then consciously choosing like, oh, let me think. I want to make sure a good thing happens this time. So I'm going to choose to make a good choice right now. That way, we're able to kind of affect behavior at a subconscious level. So if we're not able to do that in an ideal world, like let's say your child has a good day at school and you want to give them a reward at the end of the day, that's better than nothing. That might work, but it's a little more dependent on your child being able to consciously understand and make that connection between the reward and the behavior earlier. On the other hand, if we can give that feedback right away within 10 seconds, we can do this at a subconscious level where even if your child doesn't understand or isn't choosing to do something differently in the future, this should still affect behavior moving forward. So that's going to be the ideal situation whenever we're able to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about each of these. So reinforcement again, if there's a good thing that happens after. So a few examples here. With Bobby touches Katie's favorite toy is the A. The behavior, Katie asks for a turn with the toy. And then if the outcome was Katie then got a turn with the toy, that should be exactly what she wanted in this situation. So it should be a good thing from her, from her perspective. And so she should be more likely to do this behavior to ask for a turn with the toy again in the future. On the other hand, if Bobby touches Katie's toy, favorite toy, and Katie starts screaming, and then the consequence is Katie's teacher makes Bobby give her the toy so that she won't stop screaming, she still got the toy. So that's still going to be a good thing from Katie's perspective. So this is an example of reinforcing a bad behavior, unfortunately. So even though it's a bad thing for her behavior in the long term, what we're asking here is that a good thing for Katie in this moment? In that moment, Katie got her favorite toy back. So that's a good thing for her right then in the short term. It's still going to be reinforcement for Katie in this situation. So that behavior, the screaming, is going to be more likely to happen again in the future once again. This last one here says Amy's parents are talking to each other. Amy starts throwing toys at her sister, and Amy's parents stop talking and scold Amy. So again, the kind of the antecedent here, the trigger, was that her parents were talking to each other and probably ignoring her. So now she has got them to stop talking and come interact with her. So this is going to be a good thing for Amy too in this situation. This is going to be reinforcement. Like I said, we're going to talk a bit more about attention, but attention is really something that is always reinforcing for children, including children on the autism spectrum. I think we all know as adults that children like attention. We're all underestimating the extent to which that's true. And children will choose negative attention over no attention all day, every day. So this is a really common area where maybe we misstep a little bit. I think it's a very natural response when we see negative behavior to want to correct it and explain it. But we have to be very careful with that because that can be giving a lot of attention, which could actually increase the behavior when given immediately afterwards. All right, so that's reinforcement. And reinforcement is really the most powerful type of behavioral learning. So if we were to go back a couple of slides to that more likely, less likely situation, and I might even do that so you guys know what I'm talking about. If we were to go back to here, this is called the law of effect. So this is from like the early 1900s when people were first studying behaviorism, not even working with children, working with like cats and rats. So at a very basic like mammal learning level. The person who first came up with this eventually actually removed the bottom part, that less likely part, because it's not consistently true, not in the way the top part is consistently true. So this top part, do something, experience success, strong, consistent future impact on behavior moving forward. This bottom one can still work. It's not like it's never effective, but it's kind of hit or miss, and it depends on some other factors. So it's not as strong of a tool as reinforcement is. So reinforcement is really going to be our go-to first. And I think a lot of times I sometimes have families think when therapists or different kinds of interventionists really are pushing positive reinforcement, that's like makes everyone feel good and it's all nice for everyone. And that's all fine and good, true. That's or fine and good as well. That's not necessarily why we're pushing that first. We're pushing that first because it's really the best way to shape behavior. It's also a lot easier to implement first rather than diving right into the really trying to have a battle of wills over negative behavior. So punishment and extinction, they do have a time and a place, but they should really only be used in combination with systematic reinforcements when you already have reinforcement in place. So what that really translates to is once a negative behavior has occurred, we're really in damage control. That's no longer a good learning opportunity at that point to change behavior moving forward once the bad behavior has happened. Really what we want to focus on and the best we can do at that point is making sure that we don't accidentally reinforce the negative behavior or minimize the extent to which we reinforce the negative behavior, which is going to make things worse for us in the long run, of course, since it's going to increase the behavior moving forward. The real opportunity for learning and long-term improvement is anytime that a behavior goes a little better when you're in a similar situation and the behavior is a little bit better than it was last time, and we're able to reinforce that better behavior. That's where we can really work to change behavior in the long term. Okay. That said, I'm thirsty. That said, punishment and extinction have a time and a place, so we're still going to talk a little bit about them. So punishment is usually a familiar concept to most parents. So again, it's something you don't like added after, which should make that behavior less likely to occur again in the future. So if John's mother says he cannot have any more cookies is the A. B, John hits his mother. C, John gets sent to timeout without any cookies. So that should be a negative thing for John. We would think he wouldn't like that. So in theory, that should make this behavior less likely to happen again. Okay. Extinction might be a little bit less familiar. So that means something used to get reinforced. It used to get a good outcome in some way. And then we just remove that reinforcement. So now nothing happens. So let's say we have the example that Liam learned that if he pinches his mother when they walk past his favorite candy at the store, his mother will put the candy in the cart in order to get him to stop pinching. So she was reinforcing it, right? He then began to pinch his mother every time they walked past the candy. He learns that works quite well. Let me keep doing that. I can get my candy that way. Then following someone's advice, his mother begins ignoring his pinching and instead continues shopping. Liam eventually stops pinching since it's never successful anymore. So it used to get reinforced. We just remove that reinforcement and eventually it stops. So most families that I work with, a vast majority of the time, someone told them at some point, just ignore it. And that is easier said than done. And I realize that for many reasons. One of which being that some behaviors you can't ignore. They're dangerous. There's a safety issue. So in part 2, we're going to talk about what do you do in those situations? But even if you can't totally ignore something, we don't want to throw this principle out entirely. So still minimizing attention to the extent that we can is important. Another thing that makes this really difficult is the behavior often gets worse before it gets better. And that's so common and has its own name. It's called extinction burst. And it's actually very logical too, if you think about it. So I like to tell this little anecdote. Let's say at my work, there is a vending machine that I go to every day to get a soda to go with my lunch. But the vending machine's a little old. So every day I go and I put my dollar in and I give it a little shake and then my soda comes out. So I do this every day and it works fine until one day I go, put my dollar in, give the vending machine a little shake, nothing happens. So I want you to think, what do you think I might do in that situation? And when I ask parents that, if they're being honest, I think most of us, our kind of first reaction is like, shake it harder, right? Or like kick it a little bit. And that's a very natural reaction. A lot of us have. Something used to work and suddenly doesn't. The first thing we think of is like, let's do the same thing, but like turn it up a little bit. And that's usually what we see uh, with behavior, right? So if the kiddo used to scream or pinch and all of a sudden it's getting ignored, I'm gonna scream louder, I'm gonna pinch louder, or maybe like hit you instead, right? So just like ramp it up a little bit. So let's say that day I kick it and then my soda comes out. What do you think I'm gonna do the next day? It's reinforcement, right? And so if I kick it and then my soda comes out, I'm gonna kick it again the next day. And so we have to be really careful in this situation, because if we then give in or reinforce the escalated behavior, we can end up in an even worse place than where we started. On the other hand, if it never works again, I might try a couple more times, but eventually I'm going to accept like it's broken. I'm going to stop wasting my money and my energy and do something else. And that's what we see usually happens, is that there's an increase in behavior oftentimes, but then a sharp decrease. So if we're able to remain consistent, this process can work quite well, but we have to be prepared for that escalation in behavior, because it can be quite difficult to deal with. So we'll plan around that and start with reinforcement first. That kind of makes that go easier. So again, just a reminder, if the new one gets reinforced, even worse. So consistency is really key in that situation. All right. And that said, even with all this talk about punishment and extinction, I want to say a reminder that reinforcement is still the most powerful type of behavioral learning. So we're always going to use that first. Punishment and extinction, we only want to use that in combination with systematic reinforcement. So a reminder. Okay. One last new concept in this first part, and this is functions of behavior. So the purpose or objective of a behavior is called its function. For example, in the case of John hitting his mother after she said he couldn't have any more cookies, he was likely trying to protest and or to get more cookies. Therefore, the function of this hitting in this case was to express displeasure and to get more cookies. And the function of most disruptive behavior falls into one of four major categories. Can be more than one of these at a time, but usually these four cover most situations. So the first one here is escape or avoidance, attempting to escape or avoid something they don't like, trying to get out of something, basically. So you might have your older child, a teenager, who says their stomach hurts because they don't want to go to school that day. A child who throws a tantrum when asked to clean their room. Anytime you're trying to get out of doing something you don't want to do, that would be an escape avoidance function. The next one here is attention seeking. So attempting to get someone else's attention. So when Amy throws her toys, when her parents were talking to each other, is a great example of that. A child uses curse words in front of his mother because he knows that'll get a reaction. Anything loud, stomping feet, slamming doors, screaming. We do loud things for a reason. We want someone to notice. So that's a good clue. This might be attention seeking. I also like to say about attention seeking, it can be a good consolation prize. And what I mean by that is, even if it wasn't the original goal, so let's say the original goal of the behavior was to get something specific or to get out of doing something, if your kiddo realizes that's not going to be a choice, I'm not going to get that. Okay, if I can at least make a big fuss about it and get a lot of attention in the meantime, it's better than nothing. It gives kids a kind of a sense of control still. It's a little bit like misery loves company, rather than just having to like wallow and being upset by myself. If I can at least interact with you, kind of make you upset too, or let it be known that I'm very upset, it's better than nothing. So it can be a consolation prize in that way. Number 3 here is to get what they want. So attempting to obtain something specific that they like. So a child who screams until he's allowed to watch the TV show of his choice. John hits his mother when she says he can't have any more cookies. The kiddo you see having a tantrum in the middle of Target because mom wouldn't buy the candy or the toy that they wanted, to get access to something specific that they like, basically. This last category is automatically rewarding. That means that behavior is pleasant in and of itself. There's no ulterior motives. That means whatever the behavior is, I just like doing it. That's it. I just like it. It's nice. So repetitive behaviors often fall into this category. They may or may not be problematic, but sometimes they can be. Repetitively spinning in circles, hand flapping, anything like that. So anything we would call like stimming is usually automatically rewarding. I just do it because I like it. But we all do automatically rewarding behaviors. If a mother goes to get a massage, anything like that, basically the B is the C. Just the thing in and of itself is nice. and I enjoy doing it. So it's automatically rewarding. So just a little more practice here. This last one, these two here, we're going to go through these and choose the most likely function of each behavior. And then based on the consequence that's given here, determine if the behavior is more or less likely to occur again in the future. And really to determine functions, you really just typically need the A and the B. It's a little bit independent of the C. So this first one says, Benny's mother tells him it's his brother's turn to pick a movie. B, Benny begins screaming and hitting his brother. So based on that, I'm going to give you guys a few seconds to think what is probably the function of that behavior. And again, our choices are escape avoidance, attention, to get what they want, and automatically rewarding. And the C we do have here is that Benny's mother lets Benny pick the movies so that he stops screaming and hitting. So I'll give you a few more seconds to think the function, and also based on that C, that consequence, do we think Benny is more or less likely to do this again next time? Okay. So for this one, the function would be to get what they want, and most likely here, and that would be because he wants to get a chance to pick the movie, right? So if we just look at the A and the B, his mother said it's his brother's turn to pick the movie. He begins screaming and hitting his brother. So he wants to get to pick the movie instead. And I could also see an argument for there being secondary, because it can be more than one at a time, an attention-seeking function too, because he is screaming, he's being very loud and trying to get garner a lot of attention. So probably wants to pick the movie and wants everyone to know that he wants to pick the movie as well. And then the consequence, Benny's mother lets Benny pick the movie so that he stops screaming and hitting. Again, that's exactly what he wanted. So we've perfectly met the function here, which is the best way to reinforce behavior, the best way to increase it. So if it's a bad behavior, it's the worst thing to do. If it's a good behavior, it's the best thing to do because it's going to increase it moving forward. Okay, one more here at the bottom. This says, Angie's father tells her it's time to go get ready for bed. B, Angie cries, begins to cry and negotiate for a few more minutes. C, her father comforts her, tells her not to cry, and explains why it's important she gets a good night's sleep. So again, what do we think is the function of this behavior? Escape avoidance, attention, to get what they want, are automatically rewarding. And based on that consequence, do we think Angie is more or less likely to do this again next time? Okay. So the function for this one, the most likely I would say would be escape or avoidance. She wants to get out of going to get ready for bed. She wants to avoid doing that. And based on this consequence, I would say more likely. This one's a little bit tricky. When I do this with parents, sometimes I get different answers to this one. And I would say even if she does have to go get ready for bed afterwards, I would say this is more likely. And one thing to think about is really what are her options in this situation? So what is it we would want to see her do instead? Probably we would want to see her go get ready for bed right away without any protest, right? And then we have to think what would probably be the outcome for that? Maybe thank you, maybe we take it for granted if it's not usually a problem and say nothing, right? So if we compare those two outcomes, this one here where she cries and negotiates for a few more minutes, even if she doesn't technically get a few more minutes, sounds like there's this long interaction where she ends up getting a little bit of delay. With escape avoidance, delay is better than nothing. If you're not going to be able to totally get out of it, most people, if you had to choose, I need you to do something you don't want to do you want to do it right now or do you want to do it in 5 minutes? Most of us are going to choose in 5 minutes, right? Like no one really likes to be told, stop what you're doing right this second, get up, go do this other thing. I don't like that, right? And so for most of us, delay is better than nothing. So with this one here, this is kind of like a prolonged interaction that she has where she gets a little bit of delay. And she has this nice interaction where dad like comforts her and soothes her, right? So a lot of attention. If you compare that with the other one, she goes right now with just a thank you that's immediately and with less attention. And so if you think about those two options, this is really the better option, right? And those are probably what her options are realistically. And so sometimes that makes it a little clearer why a response like this might be reinforcing, even if she still does have to go get ready. Sometimes you have to compare it to what are realistically the other options that a kiddo might have. All right. So just one more practice putting this all together before our small breakout group. So we're going to read through a situation and again, find the A, B, and C, find the function, and decide if we think the behavior is more or less likely to occur again in the future. So we have Davy and his brother are playing in the living room while their mother prepares their lunches in the kitchen. Davy was busy making his favorite monster truck jump over some cars when his brother suddenly snatched the monster truck away from him. Davy starts screaming and hitting his brother. His mother comes into the living room and helps Davy calm down and pick up a new toy to play with. So I'm going to give you guys about 10 seconds to think about first, what's the A, B, and C in this situation?
Letter A. Letra A, el antecedente fue que le quitó el juguete.
Okay. So the ABCs here, the antecedent or the trigger, the A is brother taking the monster truck. The B, the behavior, is going to be Davy screams and hits his brother. The C, the consequence, mother comes in and spends time helping him calm down and pick a new activity. So how do we respond? And then the function and whether we think it's more or less likely. So I would say the most likely function here is to get what he wants. His brother took the monster truck. He would like to get the monster truck back. So to get what he wants there. And then based on the consequence, is he more or less likely to do this again in the future? And I have more likely here. And again, even if he doesn't get the monster truck back, this is a good thing that's happening for him right after. Mom doesn't come in. He's just there by himself with no monster truck. Now, by hitting and screaming, by making this kind of big ruckus, mom comes in, has this nice interaction, a lot of attention, and helps him pick a new activity. So that's still a pretty good thing, even if it's not the very best thing that could have happened. It's still a pretty good outcome for him. So I would say that's a more likely response once again. All right, so that brings us to our first small group activities. So we're going to have about a 10-minute working group break here where I'm going to have you guys fill out for a couple situations that have happened recently. You can do all four if you want. You can just do one. In part two, we're just going to focus on one specific behavior that you can pick. But just to practice for a few things that have happened recently with your kiddo, what's the A, B, and C? What's the function? And based on the response that you guys had to that, would that make it more or less likely to happen again in the future? The question was, what do we think in a couple of situations where we weren't sure about the function? The first one was if it seemed like a sensory function. I would say most things that we would say were like a sensory function, whether it's sensory seeking, sensory avoidance, whatever it might be, that typically would go with the automatically rewarding one. The other one had to do with rigidity. Rigidity would depend a little bit on the situation, but it typically would go with either escape avoidance or to get what they want. So if it's rigidity, like, I don't want to go do this thing that's not my normal routine. I don't want to go to the store because I don't normally go to the store. I want to keep doing this. That would be escape avoidance. I want to get out of going to the store. If it's something like rigidity, like I have to sleep with this, my favorite toy every night, and if I can't find it, I'm going to have a huge freak out. That would be to get what they want. He wants to have that toy there with them. So usually rigidity kind of depends on the situation, but would usually fit into one of those two categories. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and we will talk about part 2. Okay, and I do just have some examples that we'll go through here, and we'll come back to these a few times, but in case anyone did have questions that didn't get answered, and I feel like that 10 minutes went very quickly, hopefully maybe these will kind of be similar to some of the situations you might have had. So I have antecedent in this first one, child wants a snack. B, child hits parent. C, what happened after, how was the situation handled? The parent offered different snacks until they figure out what the child wants. So that would be to get what they want as the function, they want to get a snack. And this would be more likely based on this response to happen in the future. They had this whole smorgasbord of snacks offered to them. So that worked quite well for them. This next one says family goes to a new store. Child becomes overwhelmed and starts screaming. Family leaves the store in order to stop the meltdown. So that I would call an escape avoidance. I want to escape this store. It's very scary, right? And again, because that is what happened in turn, this would be a more likely next time. The third one here says a sibling takes a child's toy. The child hits a sibling, and the parent separates the two children to remain safe while otherwise ignoring. So I'd say that's to get what they want. And that would be a less likely probably situation, especially if we are reinforcing other behavior that works better. That's probably a pretty reasonable response here, the kind of best we could do in this situation. The last one, parent is not paying attention to child when out in a public setting. B, child begins running away laughing. C, parent chases after the child and calls after them, so kind of public eloping. In this situation, this is most likely an attention-seeking function. Especially kids don't always laugh when they do this. It can still be attention-seeking without that, but if your kiddo laughs when it's a very good clue that it's attention-seeking in that situation. And based on this, this is more likely. It's getting a lot of attention, it's initiating a game, and that is typically what we see in this situation, especially if it's attention-seeking, is that the kiddo thinks that's a fun game, basically. So that's going to be a more likely reaction. Okay, so for part 2, step 1 here is to identify the current pattern of behavior. So basically, I just want you guys, out of what you filled out in part 1 in our first breakout room, to pick one of those things you want to focus on in part 2 to create a behavior plan. So this should just be pulling one of those rows that you already have. So step 2 is going to be our first new thing we're adding here. So the thing we want to do next is identify the behavior you would like to see instead. So we're going to have the same antecedent as in part 1, the same A or trigger. Then we'll have the old inappropriate behavior. And what we want to add is to think, what's the new, more appropriate behavior that you want to see your child do instead in a similar situation? And don't overthink that question. A lot of times it's a really simple thing of like that last example we had, running away in public. Staying near me in public might be what we want to do, right? And I'll go over a couple more examples, but it can be a very simple thing there. The new replacement behavior should serve the same function typically as the old inappropriate behavior. So for it to work well for your child, it should have the same function. It should meet the same outcome, but it's just a more appropriate way to do it. And if there's something that your child is already able to do that can serve as a replacement behavior, we want to start there. We can work up to an even better behaviors later. So even if it's not the ideal thing you'd like to see them do, if that's maybe a harder skill for them, if there's something that can work that they can do for right now for challenging behaviors, we usually want to start there. So what I mean by that, for example, say a child can't use words to communicate, but they can lead a parent over to the item and then grab or point. If right now they're hitting to communicate, leading a parent over to, and grabbing or pointing is a big improvement there. Even though probably the best thing we'd like to see them do is use words, if this hitting is a big problem right now, let's not push them to do words quite yet. Let's just get them to go back to this other thing that's an improvement, a step in the right direction. And then once we've consistently got that down, we can work on words again. Okay. So here again are some examples of different replacement behaviors, and we'll come back to these couple example situations throughout. So a child wants a snack. If the old inappropriate behavior was a child would hit their parent when they wanted a snack, the new, more appropriate behavior we might want to see is some kind of functional communication, right? So using words, pictures, pointing, whatever is a reasonable thing for your child to do to show you what they want, some kind of more appropriate way to communicate. Family goes to a new store. The old, less appropriate behavior, child becomes overwhelmed and starts to scream. And the new, more appropriate behavior, we have a couple here. Sometimes there can be more than one. The child either tolerates the new setting, which would be great if we can get there, or asks for a break in some way when needed. Then in the case of parent not paying attention to the child when we're out in public and the child runs away laughing, what we would probably like to see instead is child asks parent to look what they're doing, shows them something, stays nearby, some other more appropriate way to get attention and interact with the parent while staying nearby. And we're not talking about the C's quite yet. We'll get there, but that's why they all just say parent response for now. So we're not at that step yet. So that's step 2. Okay. And if we want to make that new, more appropriate behavior actually happen, we want to make that easier to do, if possible, than the old inappropriate behavior, and or more effective than the old inappropriate behavior. And especially if we can check both of those boxes, we will expect that the behavior will change over time. If we can make the appropriate behavior both easier and more effective, then the behavior really should change. We would expect that it would with just a little bit of time and learning, because it's in the kiddo's best interest at that point. Easier is not always possible. We think about the example of hitting versus using words. Hitting's a lot easier than using words for a lot of kids, right? And that's why a couple slides ago when I said start with what's within reason for your child right now, that's because some of those things are way harder if they're not in your child's skill set quite yet. So we wanted to go with like the easiest thing that's more appropriate. We can always adjust how we respond to things to make things more or less effective. So the second one, we can always make sure we check that box. The first one's a little trickier, but we want to do our best at it and make the new behavior as easy as possible. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So to start actually making changes in some of the patterns that are happening, we can first add proactive prevention measures. So anything we do on the front end before the behavior has happened, that's going to make it easier to do the more appropriate behavior or make the inappropriate behavior less likely to occur in the first place. That would be a proactive prevention measure. And we're going to talk about each of these steps in depth. Just kind of an overview first. At the B here, teaching new appropriate behaviors, we don't always necessarily need to do this. So sometimes the thing you want to see your child do instead, they already know how to do. Staying nearby instead of running. Most kids know how to do that. Or like if a child is verbal, asking for something nicely versus screaming. They know how to talk in a normal volume if they already know how to talk. So sometimes we don't need to teach that, but sometimes that thing we want to see them do is not something they're able to do. We would say it's not in their repertoire yet. And in that case, we might need to kind of make a plan to teach and practice that behavior to make it easier and easier for them. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So those two, A and B here, are things that make the new behavior easier to do. And C really gets to make the new behavior more effective. So we want to alter how we respond to make sure the appropriate behaviors are always more effective at getting a good outcome for your child than the negative ones. And again, we'll go through each of these steps. So starting with adding proactive prevention measures. So again, these are any preventative measures we do before the behavior has happened that make the problem behavior less likely to occur in the first place. And I would say most parents are probably already doing a lot of these things. Like I stay nearby my child when I'm in public, or I keep sharp objects away from them, right? So keep doing those things, definitely. anything you are doing. And we just want to work to brainstorm and say, are there any additional things I could be doing? And there are an infinite number of prevention strategies you could think of and brainstorm out there. I'm not going to be able to cover every single thing, but I have some large categories and ideas to kind of help start the brainstorming here. So we'll go through each of these, but kind of some large categories: monitoring your own emotions and communication, considering setting factors, and we'll talk about what that is, environmental controls, so things in the environment, providing choices, and providing structure and setting clear expectations. This first one, I would say, is kind of the lowest hanging fruit, but I would say it's something we should always be doing, and this could be on everyone's behavior plan for any behavior, is monitoring your own emotions and communication. So children pick up on adults' stress and arousal level probably more than we realize. So if you're kiddo, if you're out in public and you see your kid starting to act up and you're like, oh my God, and then you start getting really tense and nervous about it, that's going to ramp your kiddo up more. They're going to pick up on that quite a bit. So we're all human, but do your best to kind of remain calm yourself. If you want to try to be a calming presence for your child. So monitor your tone of voice, your body language. Try your best to try to be even keeled and say, what's going to help my kiddo come back down to like a calm level? I want to be that because that's what I have control over right now. The other thing to think about here is speaking your child's language. So a lot of times kiddos act up, or problem behavior comes from not understanding what's happening or not being able to communicate what their needs are, right? And that's very confusing and makes everything scarier when you don't understand what's happening right now. So we want to do our best to be able to communicate information to our child in a way they can understand. So if your child is verbal or understands things verbally, I would say use simple, clear language to get information across to them. None of us hear long communications like me constantly, like this presentation. If someone was super, super stressed out right now, this is probably all like the teacher in Peanuts, right? Of like, what, like you're not hearing it. When you're really stressed, you need like simple, clear language. So kind of keep that in mind, simplify things a bit. If your kiddo is more visual, use gestures, use visual supports, and we're going to be talking in some of the next slides about different types of visual supports. But try to bring in as many visual elements as you can to help your child understand what is happening and what's going to be happening next. Okay. Excuse me. Next one here is setting factors. What is a setting factor? It's any background factor, like a child feeling sick, feeling hungry, feeling tired. Those kind of exist outside of this, but they're going to make everything else worse, right? And so there's still, those are in the background. There's still usually a more immediate ABC that happens. But if your kiddo is not feeling well that day or something is upsetting them that happened earlier, that setting factor is going to make that ABC way more intense, right? Maybe a smaller A is going to cause a bigger behavior. And kind of escalate in that way. So we all want to be mindful of those and try to plan around them whenever we can. Sometimes it's simple to address them. So if you know your kiddo's hungry, like, can we add a snack or a nap somewhere? Is that going to help us with our routine on a daily basis? Oftentimes we just need to plan around this. So if we're going to have them do something brand new or something really difficult, let's not do that right before a meal when he's super hungry. Typically, if you know he gets cranky right then, if you have a little tendency to get hangry then, or right before bedtime, right? That's not the best time to try something brand new and something difficult. So just kind of be mindful of that and be strategic. And attempting new difficult things is something we always want to do in the best case scenario. So like, when is my child the calmest? When is he well fed? And when is he feeling healthy? Again, we don't have control always over all of these. We have busy lives, all of us, but whenever we can, if we can account for these factors, we're going to be setting ourselves up for success. Okay, the next one here is environmental controls. So this changes to the environment or kind of setting that will help prevent problem behavior. So there's a lot of examples of ways you can do this. I have just a few here. The first one is sensory elements. So thinking about the environment, is it overwhelming? Is something about that contributing to the behavior? So the example of the new store that's overwhelming, noise canceling headphones or playing music or something that kind of helps keep your child calm. Similarly, going to the store during off hours, right? Maybe we don't want to go at noon on a Saturday. Maybe if we're trying for the first time to get him used to going out in public, can I find a Tuesday afternoon to go, right? Sometimes that is going to be less overwhelming to start with. And whenever possible at home, removing distracting or overstimulating items from sight might help kind of things go more smoothly. The next part here is access. So keeping items that are off limit, out of reach and out of sight is really a big one too, right? A lot of times kids see something that they want and then they see it, I remember like, oh yeah, there's cookies up there, I love cookies. And then if they're told I can't have cookies, that starts this whole thing off. And if you never had seen the cookies in the first place, it might not have triggered that whole kind of chain of thought there, right? So kind of being mindful about what's in sight and keeping things that aren't going to be an option out of sight, and especially out of reach, because then we're going to have to like wrestle it away from him. And that's never a situation we want to be in. This isn't always economically possible, but if it is, you know, if there's a fight every day between my two kids about the iPad, can they each have their own? Or can I have like really clear designation of like, this is yours, something like that can help avoid a situation in the first place. And then more obvious ones, child locks, lock on doors, safety harnesses in the car if needed, kinds of things that really control the situation and help avoid those problems that we might have. And a lot of times speed matters. So even if we can't totally prevent a situation, a lot of times with that, you know, maybe I'll recommend like safety gates around the house. And they're like, oh my gosh, my child knows how to get through every child lock I have ever seen. The thing is, even if that's true, it probably takes him a second and slows him down significantly. And sometimes that can be really huge. If that can at least give you the time to intervene before there's a big issue, before he got into, you know, whatever it might be, tried to drink something that was poisonous, right, or toxic. Like the fact that it was slower and he couldn't get all the way to it could be critical in that situation. So even if this isn't a full solution, if that can slow the situation down a little bit and give you more time to intervene to control things as a parent, that can go a long way in keeping everyone safe. And kind of similarly, keeping siblings further apart. If there's a lot of fighting between siblings, is the problem behavior or positioning an adult between them. So again, what is this situation we're actually talking about really depends on how these would apply. But these are just kind of big categories to get you guys thinking. The next one on here is providing choices, and ideally predictable choices. So rather than simply saying no, let children know what options they have. This can really go a long way. And ideally help them brainstorm, right? I don't know how many times kids, when left to their own devices, they're like, I'm bored, I can't think of anything to do. Even if your child can't verbalize that to you, it's a very common childhood experience that he might be going through. And a lot of times that's when we see kids get into things that they shouldn't be doing or become really upset about the one idea that occurred to me, I can't have it, and now I'm upset about that. So I have a few examples here of some visuals that would kind of help it be easier for kids to know what is available. So this first one is just an available, not available that I've actually used quite successfully with the kiddo before. During session, iPad was not an option. They used to have my face on the other side because I was an option. That's what we're doing right then. But just so he knows, okay, I can't do this thing, but here are all these other things that I can do. And this was a visual that I've used with the kiddo that was fairly minimally verbal. It's pretty intuitive. And actually some kids, and this kiddo in particular that I made this one for initially, picked this up right away, even though he doesn't understand words. He plays on the iPad though, he sees check marks and green things and red things, and it's kind of an intuitive thing. So knowing, okay, here are the toys that I can play with right now. The second one's kind of similar, a little bit more verbal, a little more word visuals in there, a little more involved, but it just kind of, this is like, these are things that are always available. Again, makes it easy to make a good choice. We don't, rather than them having to brainstorm, here's what I can do. It's all laid out for me. It makes it as easy as possible. Number 3 on here is an example of like for treats. If if a kiddo knows ahead of time what's going to be an option, that's going to kind of limit their reaction if they are denied something they want. Sometimes I think if a kiddo walks up to a parent and either like ask with words or with pictures for ice cream and the ice cream's not available, and you as the parent have to tell them, no, you can't have that. If they asked you, it's because they thought there's a chance they might get it. And every time they're told no, it's like you rolled the dice, you played the slot machine, and you freshly lost, right? It's disappointing every single time if you weren't expecting that no. So just by having this be a little bit more predictable, you're no longer the bearer of bad news, that you just gave that child that bad news that is like a fresh loss to them that they're feeling very raw and angry about. This kind of removes it outside of that, even if it takes them a little while to get, a couple days to get used to, like, oh, this is the new rule. When the third ice cream's gone, I can't have it. That you're no longer like the object of that ire in that moment. And that can really be a big impact on behavior. So the example here is if a kiddo was allowed 3 treats per day, and this is posted somewhere where everyone sees it on the fridge maybe, and every time they have one, you cross it off or remove one. So that's there really clearly and visually, and they know when it's likely they're going to be told no, or if there's still an ice cream, I can still have one more. So just to make that nice and predictable for them. Pardon. Okay. The last part on here is providing structure and setting clear expectations. The first one on here, predictable routines. Again, the more kids know what's coming, what to expect, even if the first couple of days that's hard to adjust to, after a couple of days, it's no longer so upsetting each time. So if we can try to do things in a predictable way, make it as clear as possible what's coming next, what's about to happen, because we always do it this way. This is always what, after I brush my teeth, then I go put on my pajamas. Each step of that becomes not so difficult. It's just habit at that point. The next one's timers, transition warnings. So we'll talk about visual timers a little bit on the next couple slides. But again, no one likes to be told stand up right now from what you're doing and go do this other thing. Transitions are a huge trigger for so many of the kids I work with. Still, it's always disappointing for a kid to end a fun activity, but if we at least know it's coming, whether that's with a visual timer or just saying, okay, you have 5 more minutes, okay, you have 3 more minutes, that can go a long way to making that a little bit easier. And again, these things on their own probably aren't a magic silver bullet. This is one part of the plan, right? So if it can make it a little bit easier, that it kind of working together with the rest of our behavior plan can be an important piece. These last 2 visual supports, we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth, and same with social stories. So visual supports, there's a million different kinds. We could have a whole other 2-hour presentation on visual supports. So I just have a couple examples here. And at the end of this, I will have additional resources where I'll direct you guys to. If you want to learn more about different types of visual supports, you can. But just a couple examples here to, again, help provide clear structure and set a clear expectation. And that's a big theme I want to make here, is if we can set a clear expectation ahead of time, that can go a long way as a prevention strategy. So the first thing I have here is a first then board, where you just have 2 activities. Oftentimes it's something a kiddo doesn't want to do, followed by something that you do want to do. So first eat lunch, then you can go to the playground, something like that. So just really clear what's going to happen, when can you do that thing that's fun. The second example here is a visual schedule. So that's for multi-step things. And this one is for getting ready in the morning. There's an example for toothbrushing, but that could also be like throughout the whole day, depending on what level of detail your child needs and benefits from. But it could be like school, and then we're going to go to the store, and then we're going to go home, and then you can have playtime, right? Something like that. And so, again, just a predictable routine, set that expectation ahead of time, let them know what's coming. This here is a visual timer, like I mentioned just before on the right. Counts down when an activity is ending. And so kids know when they can expect a transition. It doesn't come out of the blue. Another thing you can do, I don't have an example of this on here, but if you don't know, like, going to be 17 more minutes exactly, because we don't always know exactly when something's going to end. You could just do like, you can do a more qualitative, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or like red light, yellow light, green light, when you're like, okay, if there's 5 things left, there's 100% to go. And then you like remove one and you see like a stack of blocks, or it could even just be Post-it notes, right? Just showing like a general countdown, like, okay, where I'm about 20%, we're done. Let me remove the second Post-it note. And then when they're all gone, we're all done. So you can kind of do, if you don't know the exact time, something a little bit more qualitative like that. Okay. This last one here was probably going to be for a child that's a little bit more verbal. So this might not apply to everyone, but letting your child know what to expect in new situations, either through something like a social story or just a discussion, that's going to help them know, again, what to expect and help them control their emotions when that situation actually comes. So it's not such a surprise. So you can find or write a social story on what's going to happen. I have Carol Gray's website on here, who technically is the inventor of social stories. That's going to be in the additional resources too, but there are lots of them online. If you just Google them, you can just also informally discuss what will happen and answer questions ahead of time. Look at pictures of people or places you'll see. Again, the more you can do to help your child know what is about to happen, the better. And you can also watch a video of a similar activity online. So you could watch a video about like going to the doctor or going to the airport, right? So a lot of the sights and sounds will be the same. So it's going to be a little more predictable. I like to write a lot of my own social stories. I love a good social story. And so whether you're just discussing informally or writing a social story, here's the formula I've come up with that I like to include. It's what is happening and why. So kind of at whatever level your child is at, we're going to the store because we need to get some things to eat or whatever it is. Basically let your child know, I'm not doing this to be mean. There's a reason this is happening that might be important at whatever level of understanding you think your child is at. The next part is what to expect. So what's going to happen? We're going to be there for about this long. You're going to see this. You're going to hear this. You'll have to wait for this. Anything that's scary that might happen. You're going to the doctor, are they going to have to get a shot or not? And avoid, if you can, the temptation to leave out the scary parts, because we really want to be honest here and let kids know what's going to happen. The third part, what they should do. So what behavior we want to see them do during that time, how can they succeed? And end on a positive note, what's in it for them? So what will be the good outcome for them if they do that behavior we just asked them to do before? So I have just a little example here of one that I wrote following this. This is the tooth doctor, the dentist, one of my most popular ones. I think a lot of kiddos that I work with have a hard time with the dentist. I usually just make social stories in PowerPoint and I just Google image some clip art photos. They don't have to be anything fancy. So what is happening? Why? The dentist is like a doctor for your teeth. They help me keep my teeth healthy and strong. So that's it for that section for this story. Again, this is not some type of like crazy torture chamber. There's a reason we're going to the dentist. It's important. There's a pretty long section in this one in what to expect. There's lots of sensations at the dentist, right? So first I'm going to go to the waiting room. Then I'm going to lean back in this chair. There's going to be a bright light. They're going to put this thing in my mouth. So we spend a while going through that. Here I cut a lot of it out actually for this example. The last 2 sections, what do we want to see them do? In this part, we want to see them stay still, basically, right? So I'll be done faster if I stay still and stay calm. That's really what we want to see them do in this situation. But you might want to outline other behaviors in other situations and what's in it for them. So if I'm brave when I go to the dentist, most dentists have a treasure chest at the end. I think my mommy and daddy will be proud of me. It's also kind of a low-hanging fruit we have in any situation. If it's going to a friend's birthday party, my friends will want to hang out with me again. If you're going to add any kind of tangible reinforcers, any rewards they'll earn, I would let them know in this situation too. So just one example of how those different sections would apply here. Okay. So going back to our example situations then, adding the prevention measures. If we go back to the child wants a snack and child hits parents. Some different prevention strategies that could apply here, and there's probably a ton more, but just some examples. A visual schedule to let the child know when snacks are available and when they're not. If you're using a picture system like PECS, where the child actually communicates by handing you a picture, it's not something we covered, but it might be something you're familiar with. Make sure that's out where your child can get it, right? Otherwise, it's not a useful thing for them to use in that moment. So just thinking about the environment, is that somewhere accessible for your child? Planning around setting factors. If you know your child typically gets hungry around a certain time, be prepared to offer choices around that time, have some things ready. Strategy 3, in the environment, keep items that are an option where your child can see or point to them, especially if they're using pointing or things like that. Things that are an option, let's make those out and available so your child doesn't need to hit you because he doesn't have another option, right? Conversely, things that are unavailable, let's try to keep those out of sight. The next one here, where the family goes to the store. So prevention strategy 1, a social story or discussion to let your child know what to expect could be helpful here. A visual timer or list to let them know about how much longer the trip will last. That goes so far, right? I always think of when your computer's auto updating and you're just sitting there and you're like, this is so boring. If you can at least see that like progress of like, here's how much is left, that makes you feel so much better. So how can we provide that information to them? And whether it's like, all right, we're about halfway done, or you can just see on a list, like I've halfway crossed off my list, that could be helpful in this situation. Strategy 3 here is the environment. So try to go at a time that's typically not too busy. If you're able to, consider noise canceling headphones if you tried them out before, if your child responds well to them. That could be another thing that could be helpful. The last one here, parent not paying attention to child in public where they're running away laughing. So environmental controls, you're going to want to be mindful when you're out in public. Try not to let your child get too far from you to begin with if you know this is a problem. Strategy 2, use a social story or some kind of similar discussion to set expectations about staying nearby and how they can ask for attention or interact in better ways. So what things can they say? And strategy 3, proactively provide reinforcement via attention for your child staying nearby or trying to gain attention in a more appropriate way. So if your child was playing near you for 20 minutes before they ran, every couple minutes, making sure you're saying like, I like how you're staying near me, or interacting with them in some way so that they were getting plenty of attention when they were doing appropriate things, that they don't only get attention when they then begin to run for you. Okay. So now we're going to move over to B's here, teaching new appropriate behaviors. We're going to cover this kind of quickly because this can be a longer term process in some situations that might take a little more planning, but I'll kind of go over some large points here. So again, if needed, teach alternative appropriate behaviors. If your alternative behavior you came up with is something your child already can do pretty easily, we can totally skip this step. But if it's the skill we want to see them do, they don't have that skill yet or understand why they should act differently. If you think they really don't know, we might need to spend time teaching the new skill. An important thing here, teaching should not occur immediately after the inappropriate behavior occurs. And I think that's a really common misstep, is like talking and trying to do teaching right in response to the behavior. There's 2 reasons we want to avoid doing that. One is that it could potentially reinforce the bad behavior by providing a lot of attention immediately afterwards. And remember, attention's always reinforcing. The second reason, it's not usually successful. When kids are acting out already, they're usually a little bit worked up. It's not a good teachable moment. Like, none of us process new information well in that moment. And they're also pretty focused on like whatever was happening, right? When kids are acting out, they're like, okay, am I going to get the ice cream though or not? They're not thinking about next time, right? And so that's not usually successful. It's much better if we feel like we do need to do teaching, we do this in a calm moment that's like totally removed from the situation. So ideally before the behavior ever happened, if we can kind of predict it ahead of time, but again, not an ideal world. So if we are not able to do that, then several hours later, when the moment has totally passed, sometimes the next day, When you feel like it's totally removed, calm situation, best case scenario for my child to hear me, maybe that's when we go about teaching. And again, this might be a longer term process, and anyone who has ABA or other kind of interventions, sometimes those might kind of work with us to work on replacement skills in the longer term. I'm going to go to the right-hand column here first. Examples of skills that we might teach. Functional communication is a good one. That's oftentimes a long-term goal, but can replace a lot of problem behavior. A lot of problem behavior comes from not being able to communicate what you want. Social skills oftentimes are a good replacement for attention-seeking behaviors. A lot of times kids do negative behaviors if they don't know other better appropriate ways to interact with other people. So that might be important. Coping skills, again, if I get overwhelmed, teaching and practicing calming skills for emotion regulation, or specific tasks or skills that we need them to do, like how to get dressed. Teaching methods here, social stories we already covered, but can, again, be useful for teaching new behaviors too. Just modeling appropriate behaviors. So instead of running away from me, like you can say, look at this, and practice saying that. Visual schedules are supported, so visual with steps to brush your teeth, available activity list. Again, make it easier to do that new thing. And reinforcing successive attempts. So again, focus on improvement, get a little closer, even if they're not all the way there. If they did a little better, let's reinforce that. So reward small improvements or individual steps as they work to learn more complicated skills. Okay. And with teaching new behaviors, practice new behaviors in the easiest settings first. Start in level 1, I like to say. So children are unlikely to use brand new difficult skills in very challenging situations. A lot of times the most common one I hear is like, we're learning coping skills, but when he's really upset, he doesn't do it. That's a big leap. It's probably not going to happen immediately if we're trying to learn and practice that skill for the first time when I'm like 10 out of 10 upset. So try to use something like a new coping skill first when your kiddo's like mildly frustrated, not just having a full meltdown, and also practicing regularly when they're totally calm. If there's any chance they're going to do that thing when they're upset, they should know how to do it like the back of their hand when they're totally calm, right? So practice in those easy situations first. If we're thinking about something like building tolerance, like being able to tolerate a new store, go for a short trip initially, work in small doses, then build up tolerance for longer trips. Think of it the same way you would as like training for a marathon. You probably can't just go run a marathon all at once. You'll have to run a mile the first week, and then you can work up to 2 miles. Same thing with tolerating things that you think are unpleasant. Waiting for 15 seconds initially, if that's all we need to. Then work on waiting longer and longer. The next one here, identify and respond to early signs of a problem. So look for signs when your child is starting to get upset, then prompt skill use. So we still can intervene before your child has totally like melted down and engaged in some really bad behavior. It can still be a prevention strategy. If we wait until afterwards, now we're in C territory if we're only responding once the behavior is really bad. It's also going to be a lot easier to put the brakes on, again, when we're 1 out of 5 upset, not when we're 5 out of 5 upset. So looking for what are those early signs something is coming, let's intervene then. And the last step on here, setting up practice situations. So going to the airport before an actual flight, practicing sharing with a parent before trying to take turns with a peer, kind of these real contrived, like set up situations ahead of time. So maybe you grab your child's toy for like 5 seconds and give it back if you're starting to learn as a parent, if you're starting to learn turn taking. You're going to be a lot more patient as a parent than a peer is going to be. So we might need to practice in those like fake situations first before we're ready to try a real situation. Okay. So going through some examples here again. For the child hitting parent, in the case where they wanted the snack, we wanted the skill would really be building functional communication here. Whether that's using words, gestures, or a picture system, practice using that mode of communication frequently, starting in easy or calm situations. Don't only try to practice it when they're upset. So try to practice as much as you can. And with any of those types of functional communication, it's often appropriate to collaborate with ABA or your speech therapy providers, and they can work with you on a teaching plan, including how to prompt new behaviors and then slowly fade them out. Because again, this is sometimes a longer term, more in-depth process that unfortunately I can cover right now. This next one here, family goes to a new store and becomes overwhelmed and screams. So the new behavior would be looking to tolerate the new setting or asking for a break. So the first skill, tolerating a new setting. Again, that's something we have to build up tolerance for. So start with short trips. Maybe first go to a store when you just need one thing, right? And then work your way up to longer ones. You can also introduce and practice coping skills for kiddos that are a little bit older and more mature. And with those, maybe practice regularly in calm moments, though remember, not only at the store. Skill 2 here would be asking for a break. And again, think, how do I make that as easy as possible? Even if your child can communicate with that with words, is that going to be hard for them when they're actually upset? Maybe if we have like a visual break card or like a signal, is that going to be easier to do in the moment than remembering to use my words if I have that visual cue there? And the last one here, a parent not paying attention to child out in public, running away laughing, and what we want to see them do instead. Asking just one example of what this might be, asking the parent to look at what they're doing, seeking attention in a more appropriate way. So decide what it is your child should do or say when they want your attention, and then let them know that. Practice that skill ahead of time. And consistently try and reinforce them for using that skill, even at home and in lower risk situations. Make those words easy for them, kind of on the tip of their tongue, a matter of habit. You're going to be much more likely to do it in this other situation in that case. Okay, so I'll move for the last few minutes here over to step 5, the last step here, making appropriate behaviors more effective than inappropriate ones. So part 1 of this, first, always make sure you're meeting the original function. So the more appropriate behavior should be more effective for your child than the inappropriate behavior at meeting their original goal. And you want to make sure that difference is clear and consistent. So when we have the inappropriate behavior, do not allow that to be effective. Do not give them, allow escape or give the desired item or whatever it was. And the new, more appropriate behavior, reinforce, if at all appropriate, if you're even willing a little bit to give them that thing right then, err on the side of doing it so that we can increase this new behavior. So again, some examples here. Child hits parent when they want a snack. The child should not get the snack, versus when the child uses words, pictures, or pointing, some better functional communication. If they are at all allowed to have a snack right then, the parent should help the child find the desired snack. If they're not allowed to do it, I would try to give them options, still give them attention, still let them know you've heard them in some way, like thank you for asking nicely, or showing them with visuals what things are available right now. The next one, family goes to a new store, child becomes overwhelmed and starts to scream. We should try, if we're at all comfortable with it, not to allow a break until your child begins to calm down. On the other hand, if they tolerate the new setting for a few minutes at least, or ask for a break when needed, they get a break for asking calmly, or we can add something that's a little bit outside of the original function, but earn something they desire, like a small reward after the trip through remaining calm throughout. And you would want to let them know that they could earn that ahead of time if they do X, Y, and Z, and let them know what it is they need to do. The last one here, parent not paying attention to child while out in public and child runs away laughing. The parent would want to run and get the child and bring him back to safety while otherwise minimizing attention. Whereas if the child asks the parent to look what they're doing or place nearby, we would want to immediately, enthusiastically give praise and attention frequently before there's a problem. So kind of proactively there. Okay. Part 2 of this is to always consider attention. Remember, even when it was not the original function, attention is always reinforcing for children. Therefore, attention always increases behavior. And that's true for negative attention as well. So scolding or correcting, that's still attention that increases behavior. So looking over at this chart here, I think this is a really useful visual. At the top, we have whether your kiddo's doing something okay or not okay. And note that that doesn't say good. It says okay intentionally. Anything that's not a problem is something we want to see more of, that we want to increase. Sometimes just the lack of a problem. What could be going terribly wrong now, but isn't? Let's see more of that. On the side here, we have whether we're giving attention, which of course always increases behavior, or not. So we want to live in these two green squares as much as we can. We want to be giving positive attention anytime our kiddo's doing anything okay. Catch our child being good. On the other hand, we want to either ignore or minimize, when we can't totally ignore, our attention to inappropriate behavior. We want to avoid giving too much attention to inappropriate behavior. That's a criticism trap, the top right here. And we want to avoid the tendency to ignore or take for granted the lack of a problem, because that's still appropriate behavior that we're not reinforcing. It's an opportunity we're missing there. So based on that, we want to maximize attention for appropriate behaviors and minimize attention towards inappropriate behaviors. So just one strategy to maximize attention here. This particular strategy is probably most important for kids that are more verbal. For kids that are less verbal, I think the actual words that you use don't matter as much as the interaction and just saying something, showing your kid you see them. For a kiddo that understands more, it matters what specifically you're saying, we always recommend using specific labeled praise. And that's a praise statement that tells your child exactly what he or she did that you liked. And we find those have a larger impact on behavior than unlabeled praise. So unlabeled praise would just be saying, thank you, good job. Labeled praise would be saying, good job staying near me at the park. Or thank you for going to get ready when I asked you the first time. Being nice and clear. And I don't know if you guys relate to it all, if you've ever had like a boss or someone say something really specific that you did. I like how you made that presentation. That was really clear and easy to understand. And you're like, okay, I'm going to do that again, right? It has a much bigger impact on behavior that way. So if we're able to give this kind of information, it will have a larger impact on behavior moving forward. It helps kids also make a clear connection to the effective appropriate behavior. With this, we'll want to focus on improvement. So again, think about progress, steps along the way, and highlight and reinforce those. So I like it when you stay calm at the store. Good job staying near mommy. Thank you for using your words to ask me. Thank you for asking me nicely, even if you're denying them something. So thank you for asking me so nicely for a snack. That's not a choice right now. Here are your choices. So still giving the praise in that situation. I'm proud of you for you're being such a good boy or good girl by playing so nicely with your brother, whatever it might be. So just a few examples there. On the other hand, we'll want to minimize attention for inappropriate behaviors. So we'll want to completely ignore an inappropriate behavior whenever it's practical or possible. And instead really focus on giving attention to things we want to see instead. So I have a quick video example here where you'll see this kiddo's going to do something that this parent doesn't like. She's not even going to acknowledge it, but she's still going to give some pretty direct feedback just by when she gives attention and takes attention away. So I want to watch this and then be on the lookout for that of what didn't she like and how did she make that quite clear without giving attention to it.
Oh, hey.
Can you hear now?
Brian's just gonna.
Oh, I'm gonna have my bears sit over here and have a picnic. What shall we eat today? Oh, would you like to come to our picnic? I think we should have sandwiches. Oh, I like how you're hugging the bear. That's nice when you play gentle.
Bears. You wanna have a picnic,
You
Bears?
made them hug.
Let's have a picnic.
Yeah, let's have a nice
Yeah,
picnic.
you guys can come too.
I like when we all play together and we
Yay.
play nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of what we saw there is more attention for more appropriate behavior and then pulling attention back for less appropriate behavior. And as we relate this to a challenging behavior, thinking, even if I have to give some attention here, there shouldn't be more attention with escalating behavior. There should be more attention with de-escalating behavior. So really, that's the principle you want to have in mind. As things get a little better, that's where there should be more attention. Okay. One more video here. There we go. In the example of if there's something unsafe or that you need to address in some way, how do you minimize attention? And really you want to think, what's the minimum amount of attention you need to neutralize the situation, to keep everyone safe, to stop any major property damage without giving any extra attention. So I will say in this example, this is someone's child who's not going to go on to be an Academy Award-winning actor. Hopefully it still gets the point across. He's going to be pretending to like tear down the Christmas tree if that's unclear. I think it still is a helpful example to see.
Hey!
I'm busy right now.
Important! Super important, like the world going to explode important.
I did it! Yes! Oh, yeah. All right, so as you can
So there, when he was kind of pretending, she had a bad example first that we didn't watch for the sake of time, but she was like, stop it, don't do that. Whereas in this better version, she just kind of did that like Red Rover kind of block, right? She used her body physically to keep him away from it. Even when he got that pine cone, she went and removed it. She didn't talk with him. She didn't make extra eye contact or kind of interact too much. She wasn't too dynamic. So what was the minimum amount of attention she needed to keep everyone safe to kind of neutralize the situation? Okay, so putting those two parts together, again, meeting the original function and always considering attention. Now altogether we have when a child wants a snack, if they hit the parent, they don't get the snack, and a parent might try to block or kind of minimize, remain safe, the hitting, whatever they need to do, kind of gently move their hands down. Probably don't talk to them, probably don't say, no, stop it. That's not usually helping in that situation. It's usually extra attention. On the other hand, if they use words or pictures or pointing to show what they want, then we would want the parent to try and meet that function by helping them find the desired snack, provides clear attention and praise for using their communication skills. Again, even if you're saying no, thank you for asking me so nicely. Unfortunately, that's not a choice right now. The new store, if they become overwhelmed and start to scream, parent doesn't allow a break until the child begins to calm down. You might give a little bit of attention to gently remind the child to use coping skills or use their inside voice, but be careful and mindful of that. Make sure it's less attention than this good outcome. So the kind of comparing these two outcomes matters. So on the other hand, if they do tolerate the new setting or ask for a break, again, they get a break for asking calmly or earn something desired after the trip. And provide frequent attention and praise through staying calm throughout. That should be more attention than that gentle prompt to remind them to use their coping skills. That difference in attention always matters. Finally, the child runs away laughing. Parent runs to get the child and then bring them back to safety while otherwise minimizing attention. The child asks parent to look what they're doing. Immediately give enthusiastic praise and attention. Also, before there's a problem, every couple minutes, if your child's playing nicely nearby, interact with them in some way that's meaningful and provides nice attention for them. So if they are verbal, giving praise, otherwise just being nearby, kind of saying things to them about what they're doing, give lots of attention for that appropriate behavior. Okay, so with that said, we're ready to put this all together. This is where the second two worksheets come in. So on worksheet 1, you would come up with the old pattern of behavior and that new pattern, making sure that your response to the old bad behavior is going to make it less likely to occur again in the future, and the response to the good behavior is going to make it more likely. And on the second page, you can write out details of any prevention strategies, and any skills for teaching new behaviors, as well as if you want to kind of flesh out a little bit more how you respond to both the good and bad behaviors. So we're couple minutes behind schedule. I think maybe we'll do like 10 minutes in the small breakout group to work on this one as well.
Out a follow-up email tomorrow with the presentation and materials as well as the survey. If you have any questions that come up afterwards, please feel free to email us. Put our email in the chat, and we'll get those questions answered for you. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good rest of your night.